Hello. The yin practice will include postures that include caterpillar pose, shoelace pose, deer pose with twists on either side, saddle pose, and dragonfly pose with lateral bends. And maybe we'll try legs up the wall for the resting pose at the end of practice. So if you like legs up the wall, you might want to have some wall space available for that pose. Other useful props will be yoga blocks if you have them. Maybe a bolster if you have that too. And of course, pillows and blankets for soft cushioning if you need them. And again, if maybe you can handle all of the postures without any props, it's up to you. The story I'll tell during class is another astronomy one. So it's about the star Proxima Centauri. Practice starts in a comfortable seat. You can sit cross-legged if this is available to you, but if this doesn't create comfort and stability, then give yourself permission to find a seat that's more accessible to you. We'll do a little bit of breathing here in the next couple of minutes here. So maybe become aware of your torso, allow it to expand. This means maybe lightly toning through the core, and maybe your sternum reaches up and forward slightly, shoulders roll back, chin slightly tucks, and so that your ears kind of roll over the tops of your shoulders, crown of your head pointing up towards the ceiling, but with ease here. And check in with your breath. Notice what your breath is up to. Check in with your external environment, the sounds, the noises, the feelings, the temperature of the room. Check in with your internal environment, any kind of sensations that might be going on, to just kind of get the state of the moment feel of what's going on. This includes your mental and emotional state as well. Just acknowledge, it's time to acknowledge and accept what's going on here. Accept your breath, so natural inhales, natural exhales. Maybe your breath just very naturally deepens when you start some sort of yoga or mindfulness practice here. And you can continue this natural breathing. I'm going to introduce what I call quiescent and flare breath here, just as a type of breathing exercise here. So the way this works is you will take 3 normal natural breaths. And the difference is you're going to have to count them. So you're taking 1 normal breath, 2 normal breaths, 3 normal breaths. On the 4th breath will be more complete, more dramatic inhale and exhale. So that's the flare. So the quiescent breathing is just your normal breath. The flare breath is this more deep, dramatic 4th breath. So you can keep your eyes open, you can keep your eyes closed, you can relax your face, hands and arms are comfortable. And you just notice your first 3 breaths. You're not trying to change them. You're just trying to be your natural breaths. And then when you get to your 4th breath, let your 4th breath be a slow, deep, full inhale. And a deep, slow exhale. So that's the flare. You can do this maybe 1 or 2 more times at your own pace here. So 3 natural breaths. Whatever that might be for you. They might be different than mine. And then on your 4th breath, more dramatic inhale and exhale. Maybe one more cycle of this. This takes time because this is 4 breaths that we're going through for each cycle. You're noticing your natural breath, and that's important. And then you take that kind of more gigantic breath here. And then we'll do a couple of yang warm-ups before we move into the first yin posture. So make your way onto hands and knees. Come into table pose here. This needs to feel stable. So if you need to adjust your arms, your hands, your knees, your feet to make this feel stable here. Spine should be nice and neutral here. And then bring some awareness to your torso, to your core. This is actually a light core exercise here. So from here, rooting through your left leg, raise your right leg and extend it out behind you, just to torso height, so it doesn't have to go higher. It just needs to stay here. You're kind of pressing, your foot is flexed, and you're trying to press that heel towards the wall behind you here. See how this feels. And if you want to create more stability, maybe a little bit more toning or engagement through the core, maybe through the abdomen here. But torso is trying to stay neutral here. You can stay here and just breathe. Maybe even do a flare breath, 3 natural breaths, and then a big inhale and exhale at some point. If you want a little bit more, begin to slowly raise the left arm and extend it forward. So opposite arm as the leg. And then the energetic cue here is to create lots of length through your fingertips, through the back heel, so you're trying to grow your body as long as possible. And for some people that might increase the stability of this balancy pose. And then gently bring yourself back to table. We'll do the other side. So for the first step here is root through the leg that's going to stay on the ground, and then slowly begin to extend out through the opposite leg. This is the left leg now here. See how this feels. Give yourself permission to stay here if this is intense enough. This is good core work already. So there's actually some toning going on in the core to keep all of this stable here. You can stay here, or you can start to reach the right arm forward. Again, it gets bouncy here. So the idea is core is toning and you're reaching forward and back with that arm and that leg to maybe try to create some more stability. There should be effort here because this is a yang pose. And then when you're ready, just come back to table pose. Once you get back to table pose, invite yourself down onto your belly. Legs comfortably extended out behind you. And then from here, come into a Sphinx pose. This is not the first yin posture. This is just setting up for a thigh stretch. So take your left forearm and move it 90 degrees so that it crosses the front of your torso. Then bend your right knee and bring your right heel in towards your hip. Reach back with your right hand and see if you can grab that right foot here. If you got the right foot, then just start pulling that heel in towards your hip as far as it goes here until it stops here. And you kind of use a little bit of yang effort here to just, you'll know when to stop. If it's painful, that's too far, but usually there's a good pressure here in that thigh. Remember to breathe here, and then go ahead and gently release. Come back to this Sphinx pose. The other side. So now the right forearm sweeps across, and you're rooting through that right forearm. Bend the left knee, reach back with the left arm. See if you can find that left foot, and then pull that left foot in just as far as it goes. Maybe stay for a breath or two here as you're pulling on that foot here and seeing if you can feel this through the front of that thigh. And then go ahead and release. And then bring yourself back up. We're moving into staff pose. Staff pose is another yang posture that maybe doesn't look very yang. If you have a lot of stiffness in your low back or in your legs, maybe sit up on a little bit of height. But in staff pose, we're trying to make an L shape. So we're trying to straighten our torso as much as possible. So nice toning through the core. Maybe arms are outside, roll your shoulders back. So I'm doing this to help lift my torso up to make it longer here. Legs are maybe initially bent, but you're actually trying to engage muscle to make them as straight as possible. So you're using your muscles to make your torso as straight and your legs as straight here. That's why this is a yang pose. This is staff pose. Maybe stay here for 1 or 2 more breaths. This is a deceptive pose because it actually requires a lot of muscle engagement to kind of maximize the look of this posture. And that's why it's yang, because we have to engage muscles to create the length here. And then release, and we'll move into the first yin posture. So this is the first yin posture where we're switching to a yin attitude here. So now we think about softening the muscles and just residing for long periods of time to put an emphasis on pressurizing the connective tissue. This posture is known as caterpillar pose. So it's a simple forward fold with legs extended. However, some of us can't have our legs completely straight. That creates too much pain. So by all means, keep your knees bent as much as you need to for this pose. And if you're one of these people that can have straight legs and do this posture, then by all means, you're trying to find your edge here. Grow up tall just for a moment, and then hinge forward from your hip sockets in caterpillar here. Once you've done all the hinging, release and relax the muscles in your torso. Let your torso round forward. Any amount until it stops. So as you release and you relax, maybe you come to these natural stopping points, and maybe you stop here, or maybe you stop here, or maybe you stop here, or maybe your torso just lays flat on your legs and you stop there. So you're finding your edge here. Now we're not trying to get into pain here. So if your legs are straightening and that's creating pain in the back of your legs, then place something underneath your legs to keep the bend in the legs here. Also, if you're needing something, if you only go forward, needing something to rest your torso on, you can always put props. I grabbed the bolster here to rest your torso on. We'll try to stay for 3 or so minutes. But the idea with yin is to get in touch with your inner landscape, feel what's going on with the physical sensations that are going on here. And just stay here for as long as you think is appropriate. And it might not be 3 minutes. It might be 1 minute, it might be 2 minutes, it might be 5 minutes. This is a video, so you can ignore me or pause the video if you want to stay longer here. Time is another dimension of depth. And in yin, it's kind of the dimension that gets added here. So all of this is to find our edge here. Head can hang, that's okay with the neck. If it's not okay with the neck, find a prop to prop your head up on here. And then when you find your appropriate shape that's for your body, then you stay and keep track of how you're feeling. And by how you're feeling, I mean the physical sensations, so that if things get too painful, you can change your edge. If all sensations disappear, you can change your edge. This is the first principle of yin. The second principle is staying for time here. We've been here for a little over a minute, so we got a couple minutes to go. Staying is a hard one. Staying requires patience. Staying requires vigilance, because you're keeping track. You're using your mental focus to keep track of your sensations. So when your mind wanders, which is okay, gently bring it back to recheck your sensations. If they're okay, you stay. If your mind wanders again, you gently bring it back. This is part of the practice of learning how to stay here. And then finally, you stay for a while. That's the time element here. So we have maybe 1 more minute. Been here for about 2 minutes. 2 minutes felt like enough. Slowly bring yourself out. If things are still going kind of okay, they don't have to be comfortable, but they have to be not injurious here. Then this is maybe where the challenge is. You try to stay for this final minute. So this final minute, I'll start to tell the story, my star story here. So there's often a trick question that gets asked in astronomy. And that trick question is, what is the closest star to the Earth? And of course, it's a trick question because the closest star to the Earth is our own sun. The sun itself is a normal G-type star. We may not think of it as such because it's so much closer than any of the other stars that we think maybe it's entirely a different entity. But in the end, it's a star, just like all the other stars that we see in the night sky. It's just that it's so close that it's not a nighttime star. It's so bright that it creates day for us here. So just one or two more breaths here in caterpillar, if you're still there. And then you can slowly bring yourself out. Maybe if you were in the forward fold, plant your hands and slowly bring your torso all the way up. Your torso might be achy from that long forward fold. So to work the kinks out, a little bit of motion. I like twists, but maybe a back bend would feel good. So you can put your hands on the floor, lean back, and then lift your sternum up towards the ceiling to create back bend. Maybe your legs are a little bit done being so straight, so you can bend your knees, maybe do some windshield wipers to work out the kinks there. And then we'll get set up for the next yin posture. The next yin posture is a hip opener known as Shoelace Pose. It's an asymmetrical posture. So again, you may want to sit up on a little bit of padding. I'm going to use this blanket. I'm going to turn it 45 degrees. So I'm sitting on a corner of the blanket. And you might see why that kind of works. Sometimes you don't need any props for this posture. Sometimes you need more props. Maybe you need to sit up on a block here. Legs start extended out in front, just like caterpillar pose. But this time, bend your left knee and stack that left knee on top of the right knee. So this posture is called half shoelace, with the right leg straight. Some people really like this pose, so if you're really liking this pose, maybe you want to just stay here. But full shoelace is to bend the bottom knee and bring that right heel on the outside of the left hip. So in a sense, you've got one leg stacked on top of the other leg. This is meant to be a hip opener, not a knee opener. So if you have knee instability or knee pain, you can maybe manage it with a prop, depending on what knee. If it's the bottom knee, pop goes under the bottom knee. If that's the top knee, put it under the top knee. Here. If shoelace doesn't work for you, no matter what you do, you can make little adjustments. If all the adjustments aren't working for you, you can try eye of the needle. And eye of the needle is this pose where you make your way onto your back. Knees are bent, feet are on the floor. Bring the left leg in, then bring the left heel on the right thigh, left knee goes out wide. You can start here with the right foot on the floor, or start bringing that right leg in, and you can hold it in place with your hands either behind the right thigh or in front of the right shin. Find your distance here. And you kind of just pull in until you feel as much pressure as you find appropriate for this posture. Otherwise, if shoelace is sort of working for you, we'll stick around in shoelace here for a couple more minutes. You can stay seated upright, but if you want a little bit more juice in this posture, then you can fold forward like we did in caterpillar. So same principle is you're trying to soften and round your spine. You maybe hinge forward from your hips a little bit first. And then when you've done that, rest of your torso slowly relaxes until it stops where it naturally does. Maybe it stops up here and you maybe want some props to stabilize that. Maybe it's okay to hang in thin air. Maybe some of you can just rest your torso on your legs here. Or maybe your head and your neck feeling unstable. So again, you can get some blocks to put underneath your head or your neck here. So you're finding what works for you here. And then if leaning forward dump too much pressure in your knees, the little trick is to press your hands into the ground and press your body weight back into your hips here. That will create more pressure in your hips, but that's kind of the physical intention of the posture, if it relieves the knees of pain here. So settle here. Once again, find your breath. Keep track of your physical sensations, and maybe stay here for as long as appropriate. We're back. or about another minute here on this side here. Of course, when we get asked the trick question in astronomy, what is the closest star to the Earth? Sometimes, well, we think it's a trick because we're trying to think of the closest star to us other than the sun, right? That's why it's a trick question. And that's kind of this talk. So if we say, what's the closest star to the sun, then that makes more sense. Or the closest star to our own solar system that includes our sun. And of course, that star is the star Proxima Centauri, which is I'm going to talk about a little bit during class. It's the closest star to our sun. And that's its claim to fame. So probably most of us learned or have heard of this star just because that's why it's famous. Now, unfortunately, the first complication about Proxima Centauri is it's not a star that we can see with the naked eye. That's kind of a bummer. And so you can't run outside and see Proxima Centauri, even though it's the closest star to us, for a couple of reasons. We need to start coming out of this shoelace posture. So if you're still in shoelace, slowly bring yourself up from the forward fold. Maybe shake the forward fold out a little bit if you need to. Lean back to release the shoelace legs, or release the eye of the needle legs. Extend the legs out, point and flex your feet a few times, and any other kind of movements you need to do. But we have the other side of shoelace to do, so we can get right into it here if we want to here. Now it's the right leg, or the other leg that stacks on top of the left leg. Stay in half shoelace if you're really loving this pose, or continue into full shoelace by bending the bottom knee and using any kind of props you need to create stability in the knees. You can stay upright, or you can fold forward. Or again, if this is just a posture that doesn't work for you, then try eye of the needle on the other side. And then we'll stay here for a few minutes. First of all, the star Proxima Centauri is in the constellation the Centaur, thus the word Centauri. And the Centaur constellation is in the southern celestial hemisphere. What that means is you cannot see it very easily from the northern hemisphere. So the first thing you have to do is you have to move. You have to move down into Australia or to Chile or South Africa or somewhere to actually see this star, because it's getting pretty close to the southern celestial pole, and it's not a star. It's just not a star that you can see from up north. And most humans live in the northern hemisphere, so you have to be a lucky human, one of the few lucky humans that live in the southern hemisphere. The second thing is Proxima Centauri is very faint. So it's actually a little tiny star, even though it's very close. And because it's faint, it shines at 11th magnitude. Now the magnitude system goes backwards. So the brighter a star is, the lower the number. The fainter a star is, the bigger the number. We humans can see down to 6th magnitude, which means you have to have a fairly decent telescope in order to see an 11th magnitude star. And again, not something you're going to see with the naked eye, and you need to know exactly where to look to see Proxima Centauri. Proxima Centauri is a tiny little red dwarf star. It's an M-type star. So it has 1/8 the mass of our own sun, and it has 1/7 the volume. So it turns out Proxima Centauri is only 1.5 times larger in volume than the planet Jupiter. So if you want to think of it in terms of size, think of it more on the size of Jupiter than the sun, although it's a lot more dense than Jupiter. It's actually 130 times more massive than Jupiter. It's just the same physical size as Jupiter here. Because it's so small and so cool, it's a red star. That's why it's so faint, and that's why we can't see it with our naked eye, even though it's our nearest next door neighbor. It's about 5 more breaths on this side, if that's appropriate. If you were kind of wishing you could come out, that's maybe your body or your internal landscape telling you that you need to come out. So it's okay to come out. So it's in the southern hemisphere. It's really, really faint, but it is part of a brighter system. In fact, it's part of a multiple star system that is very visible. It's part of the Alpha Centauri star system. And by the way, the Alpha Centauri star system is easily visible because it's made up of slightly bigger, brighter stars. In fact, the Alpha Centauri system is made up of 3 stars. Alpha Centauri A, Alpha Centauri B, and Alpha Centauri C, which is just another name for Proxima Centauri here. We're slowly coming out of Shoelace on this side, so slowly bring yourself up. Maybe do a little bit of wiggling around here. Maybe start releasing your shoelace or your eye of the needlepoint pose. And again, a little bit of motion to work out the kinks. Normally I like to do shoelace here. Or not shoelace, but windshield wipers is my favorite counter pose. And you can do windshield wipers if you know what that is. But we're moving right into deer pose. And it turns out deer pose is a natural counter pose to these hip openers like shoelace and sleeping swan. So I'm going to get a block for deer pose. Just because deer pose requires some internal rotation, I'm naturally not very internally rotated, which is why I like to sit up on a little bit of extra height. You may want to experiment with some height or no height. For deer pose, you start out with legs out in front, just like we did for shoelace. This is another seated posture. We'll add a twist to deer pose here. Take the left leg, bend the left knee, and bring the left heel on the outside of the left leg. This is the internally rotated leg here. You can move that left knee out to the left. The right leg is bent, bring the right heel to the inside of the hip. So this is essentially deer pose, and you might be able to do this without any height. It just depends on the internal and external rotation of your hip joints. That's the point to deer pose here. You can experiment with moving your feet farther away from your hips to make this more challenging. You're finding your edge. Deer pose can be a subtle pose, so it might take some experimentation to find this posture. This is the posture. We'll add a twist to this, and we'll just stay here for 2 minutes because doing a seated twist is a little bit young, and so we won't spend quite as much time here. So maybe go up tall through your torso, make your spine nice and neutral, and then begin to twist to your right. So you're twisting away from this internally rotated leg here. And a gentle twist. So you're going to just kind of this gentle stopping point. Maybe notice where you're feeling the pressure points of the stop. You know, if I twist this way, I can feel some new pressure points developing clear down in my hips, but you're built differently than I am, so that might not be your experience. And this is where we'll stay here for about another 1.5 minutes here. If you feel nothing in the twist, keep going deeper until you feel a little bit of light pressure in the twist. It doesn't have to be intense. And then allow yourself to reside here. You can twist your neck if that feels okay. You can keep your head and neck neutral if that feels better. Just focus on the twist in the torso. So the main Alpha Centauri system, which is actually pretty common for most stars in the galaxy and the universe. There's a few isolated stars all by themselves. Turn out most of them have a family of planets. Most stars are in multiple star system. Proxima Centauri is no exception. It's part of a 3-star system. And the other 2 stars in the system are much closer together. And they're much bigger than Proxima Centauri. They turn out to be very, very kind of normal stars. Both of them are very close to being like our sun. One's a G-type star that's a little bit bigger than the sun. One is a K-type star that's slightly smaller than the sun, but roughly speaking, they're both about the same size and mass as the sun. And they're close together. They're about well, their orbit is eccentric, so the distance between them changes, and they orbit each other every 80 years. This Alpha Centauri A and Alpha Centauri B. And since they're as big as our sun, and since they're so close, notice I haven't even mentioned the distance so far. The distance of that system, of both of them from our sun, from us, is about 4.3 light years away. And that's the closest star system to our own sun. It's 4.3 light years. And a light year is 6 trillion miles, or roughly 10 trillion kilometers. And so if you do the math, it ends up being about 25 trillion miles, or about 40 trillion kilometers, if you need it in some other units other than a light year. Here. Proxima Centauri is in a much larger orbit around these other two. We can slowly start coming out of this twist. So come out of the twist, maybe do a little bit of a counter twist. And then after the counter twist, slowly come out of deer pose on this side. So legs come out long again here. And then we're setting up for deer pose on the other side. Right knee bend, right heel comes on the outside of the right heel, and don't worry about what your foot is doing. Your foot is doing the most comfortable thing it can do. Kind of glad you can't see my foot, because some of us, our foot is up to the side, some of us, our foot is underneath. And then bend the left knee, bring the left heel in, and you can experiment with moving the feet out to make this posture more challenging or more deep here. You'll notice that at some point a hip starts to lift up off the floor. This is why I'm sitting on a block, because my left hip would be really lifted up high. Grow up tall through your torso, gently twist to the other side. So twist to the left here. Nice gentle twist. Find an accessible stopping point here. Stay here. Find your breath. And again, decide what you want to do with your neck. If you want your neck to get a little bit of a twist, you can include that in the twist, or you can keep your head and your neck neutral. Proxima Centauri is this tiny little star that's a fifth of a light year away from its two companions through the main Alpha Centauri system. And it's so far away and so small, it takes a long time to orbit the other two stars. So even though the other two stars take 80 years to orbit each other, Proxima Centauri takes 550,000 years to make one orbit over its larger companions. Because of that, it moves towards us and away from us, but so slowly that it's going to be the closest star to us for the foreseeable future, i.e. for the next tens of thousands of years. So it's in no danger of moving so far away that the other stars become closer. Proxima Centauri will still be the correct answer to the trivia question, what's the closest star to the sun for the next 50,000 years or 100,000 years. So we don't have to worry about that answer changing. So it's a part of a much more complicated system here. So some characteristics. Again, I talked about how small and how cool the star is. It's so cool that it appears red. That's why it's called a red star or a red dwarf. And it's much more massive than Jupiter, but as far as weight-wise or mass-wise, but volume-wise, it's about the same size of Jupiter. Nonetheless, recently, astronomers have discovered planets. So we're in this hunt for exoplanets around other stars. What we're finding is planets around almost all stars. And we found planets around even the closest star to us. So Proxima Centauri has two exoplanets around it. One is possibly in the habitable zone. So that gets really interesting real fast here, that the closest star might have a habitable planet running around it. Turns out that's probably not the case here, but we need to come out of this twist. So slowly bring yourself back forward. If you need to, do a little bit of a counter twist. We're done with deer pose. So bring your legs out in front. Again, a little bit of movement in the legs here to work out the kinks. And now we're setting up for a posture known as saddle pose. Saddle pose can be a nice posture for some of us and not so nice for others. So there'll be an alternative, and the alternative will be a supported bridge pose that I tend to call Milky Way. I'll demonstrate saddle first, and you can see how saddle goes. And if saddle is not your cup of tea, then what you will need is some blocks or some books for the supported bridge pose. Saddle pose might be nice if you have a bolster, so maybe have a bolster handy. So saddle pose starts with you sitting back on or in between your heels. Right now I'm kind of sitting on my heels, but I can move my heels out and I can sit in between my heels. It's kind of yogi's choice here. Knees can be together, but knees can also be pretty wide. So it doesn't really matter what the width of the knees are here. If you're sitting, cringing, watching me sit like this, then probably means saddle pose is not for you here. But if you can sit reasonably like this is the beginning of saddle pose. The second part of saddle pose is to start slowly leaning back as far as you can. And for some people, they might reach the floor. For some of us, maybe just leaning back a little ways creates so much pressure that we just kind of hang out on our arms here. But if you have some props, like a bolster, you can take a bolster, place it up against the back of your low back. And maybe that's all that's needed for you to reach the floor. Notice my knees have popped up off the floor. This is okay as long as my knees don't hurt, as long as they're not in pain. Mine don't, so I can just allow my knees to float. Maybe they make it back to the ground. If this was too far, then you bring yourself back up to a height that is more reasonable. So this is saddle pose. If saddle pose is just not working for you, come out of saddle pose slowly. And you can move into bridge pose, the supported bridge pose. So you'll make your way onto your back, bend your knees and put your feet on the ground. Have a prop to create height. I have 2 blocks here. On the medium setting, root through your feet and your shoulders, lift up your hips, and place the blocks underneath your pelvic bone, your low back, so that it feels stable. So the blocks are there to create height and stability. So if they don't feel stable, move them around until they do feel stable here. And then very slowly begin to lengthen one leg out, maybe lengthen both legs out. And if this creates too much strain, I would suggest a lower setting of the blocks here. But you can also keep the knees bent here. The idea is to get some tension in the psoas. And that's what saddle is doing. That's what this posture is doing with the legs extended. You can just stay here in this supported bridge, which I call Milky Way pose, because you're making a graceful arc like the Milky Way. Or if saddle is working for you, just try to stay in saddle as long as you can, and when you've had enough of it, come out. We'll try to stay in saddle for another 1.5 minutes here. So when astronomers have recently discovered 2 planets, one is called Proxima Centauri b, and that planet is in the habitable zone. And the habitable zone is simply an orbit that's far enough away from the star where liquid water can be present on the surface. And the planet is about 1.1 times the mass of Earth. So it's slightly larger than Earth, but not a lot larger than Earth. So it's roughly an Earth-sized planet in the habitable zone. This has gotten everyone really excited here. And then there's another planet that's a little bit farther out. It's about twice the size of Earth, twice the mass of Earth, but it's considered too far away. It's no longer in the habitable zone. It's too far away from this little red star. And so liquid water can exist there. So people aren't too terribly excited about that one. But they got terribly excited about the first one, about the first star here. So about 3 more breaths here in saddle if you're still like kind of trying to stay in here. So not too much longer, maybe 1 more breath. And then slowly, when you're ready, at your own pace, try to come out of saddle. I never know a good way to tell people how to get out of saddle, so you have to grunt and groan. Use your arms, your forearms, your hands. I like to grab my shins and my ankles, but use whatever method that you can find to get yourself up. And our knees were so deeply flexed in that posture. If you're in supported bridge, you can start coming out of supported bridge. You can do something to extend the legs gently to work out the kinks. I like to suggest a young counter pose, which is just simply downward facing dog, because downward facing dog does extend the legs here. So you can come into downward facing dog if you like that pose. You can pedal your heels. You can extend out through your spine here, root through your hands and your feet, just for a while. Kind of work out that stagnation from having the legs deeply flexed. And then we'll get set up for the next yin posture, which is Dragonfly Pose. And we'll add some twists to this. So a couple of blocks might actually be useful for Dragonfly. I like to sit on some height, so I'm going to sit on a block. And then the other block I'm going to need for the lateral bends here. So find your way to seated, legs out in front. Sit up on as much height as you need to, and then the legs come out as wide as they go for you. For some of you, they'll go a lot wider than my legs. For some of you, they won't go as far. It doesn't matter. You're just going to your own stopping point. Knees can be flexed if they need to be to protect the bottoms if it's too painful to have the legs straight. Relax the muscles in the legs so they might rotate out, they might rotate in, they might stay straight. It doesn't really matter. You can put things underneath the knees to keep the knees bent here. So this is Dragonfly. Instead of folding forward though, we'll add a lateral bend to this. So this is where a block is handy. Place the block just on either side of the right leg. And then turn and face the left leg. Grow up tall here, and then gently laterally bend over the right leg. You can use the block to rest your forearm on, and then you can use your forearm to rest your head on. You can do other things with this left arm. You can just put it behind your torso to roll the left shoulder back. And we'll stay here in the lateral bend for just a couple of minutes. So not quite 3 or 4 minutes, just 2 minutes here. And then we'll switch sides with the lateral bend, but we'll maybe try to stay in Dragonfly Pose, Dragonfly legs here. So we'll settle here, get in touch with your breath, and your other sensations here. And if you're trying to figure out something useful to do with your breath, you can always come back to this quiescent and flare breathing, which brings up my next topic about Proxima Centauri. So what astronomers have also noticed about Proxima Centauri is that it flares. And what is meant by that is it's a small star that doesn't give out very much light, but maybe once a day it produces this huge outburst of light and radiation, mostly in the ultraviolet range. And what they believe is happening is Proxima Centauri has very strong magnetic fields. And as those magnetic fields build up and rotate and twist, they store energy, and at some point they kind of kink back and kick out this huge amount of energy almost once a day. Even though this is kind of interesting because Proxima Centauri itself is a very small and dim star, and yet it has this power to kick out a huge amount of energy about once a day. In other words, it flares. It goes around, it's kind of quiet, it's in a quiescent state, and then boom, it'll send out a flare. This is why astronomers get less excited about the habitability of the exoplanet that they found around Proxima Centauri. So just one more breath here on this lateral bend. And then slowly maybe use your hand to help press yourself back up. Maybe straighten out for a moment, maybe do some twists to work out the kinks. Now we're going to the other side with the back bend. So I'm moving my block to the left leg now. Grow up tall, turn and face the right leg, and then gently laterally bend over the other way. Come to your stopping point here. And remember, you can adjust the block. Maybe you don't go very far. So maybe the block is on its high height here. Maybe it's on its low height. Maybe you're really bendy, so you don't even need a block here. Elbow makes it all the way down onto the floor. And then we stay here. A couple more minutes. Because of this outburst of energy from Proxima Centauri, I think it's so much energy that it might actually boil off the atmosphere of Proxima Centauri b, the exoplanet in the habitable zone. So even though the planet is the right size and the right distance from the star, because of the star actually flares up, it's known as a flare star, they think that's too much energy for the planet to have a stable atmosphere. In which case, it's kind of a bummer. Everybody gets a little bit depressed because most likely it's not a habitable planet, even though it makes the news every once in a while as our closest star to our sun has a habitable planet around it. It's like, yeah, no, it's more complicated than that, and most likely its little flares kind of burn off the atmosphere from that planet. So not as newsworthy or headline worthy as it first appears here. So maybe one more minute in this lateral bend, unless you're kind of sick of the lateral bend. Notice how your legs are doing and your hips are doing. You might have to adjust the angle of your legs or the angle of your knees here. So again, I don't know how interesting it is to talk. I tend to like to talk about things in the night sky that we can actually see, because seeing is sort of believing. And the claim to fame to Proxima Centauri is that it is the closest star to the sun. It's only 4.2 light years. It's slightly less than the main Alpha Centauri system. It was not discovered until 1915 by an astronomer that was down in South Africa, so somewhere in the southern hemisphere, and it took them a while to realize that it was part of the much brighter system, Alpha Centauri. By the way, Alpha Centauri system is the third brightest star system in the night sky. It's slightly dimmer than Sirius and Canopus. But Proxima Centauri can't see without a big telescope at all, and yet it owns the claim to fame as the closest star to the sun. We're done with this lateral bend, so slowly bring yourself all the way up to seated. You can make little motions with your torso, but maybe by this time your legs and your hips are kind of done with the dragonfly legs. So you can slowly move them back in. You can use your arms and just do one leg at a time so that you can be gentle with yourself here. That was the last really intense long-held yin posture. A little bit of integration before we move into our resting pose. Maybe make your way onto your back. We'll try reclined bound angle pose here. So bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest, and then bring your feet together and weave your arms in between your feet. Keep your feet together, clasp your feet with your hands, and then knees move out wide to either side. And then use your hands and arms to just gently pull your feet towards your torso here until you're feeling a nice hip opener, nice hip stretch here. You can wriggle around if you need to. And then release. If there's any other gentle motions you'd like to do those. And now we're moving into our resting pose. We're moving into Shavasana. As promised, I'm going to suggest legs up the wall pose, but if there's another restorative pose that you feel it would be nicer, then practice that one. Otherwise, for legs up the wall, clear some wall space. You might like to have some padding underneath your hips for this. I've got a blanket here. You can even use a bolster. You might prefer to not have any kind of padding underneath you. So find how much of it suits you. Sit next to the wall sideways. The hardest part to legs up the wall is getting into legs up the wall. Might take a few tries here. So you kind of lean back and spin your legs up the wall. If it doesn't happen the first try, then you kind of just keep kind of going until you get yourself up here. And then the cue always is try to get your hips up next to the wall. For a lot of us, that's not going to happen. You get your hips as close to the wall as you can, and then that's good enough here. And then arms extend out on either side, maybe far enough away so your palms can face up towards the ceiling. Everything else is comfortable and soft. Head can have a pillow, if the head wants a pillow here. If you get cold, again, blankets or clothing, now's the time to put that on. Maybe socks for your feet or a nice sweater here. And take your time getting into this pose, because you can take a long time in legs up the wall. We'll only spend a minute or two here at the end of this practice, but you can stay here for 10 minutes or 20 minutes if you want to. And then soften here. So let go of your day, let go of your practice. Give yourself permission to be here. And the only thing you have to do here is nothing. Basically, just breathe here. This is maybe where I suggest coming back to that quiescent and flare breathing. There's the tie-in to Proxima Centauri. Is for a while your breath is quiescent. It's this soft, normal, natural breath. And then if you wish, you can create a flare breath. Maybe the fourth breath after every 3, or maybe the 5th breath after every 4, or the 6th breath after every 5. Just a little bit more expansive inhale, and a little bit deeper, softer, longer exhale. And then after that flare breath, return to your natural breath, return to your true breath, the breath that is a part of your true being, your body here. And as you're doing all of this, see if you can notice subtle tension in parts of your body that can be released. You can even notice the tension that can't be released, that maybe needs to stay there. And allow your thoughts to just float. At some point, Bring yourself back. Maybe start to deepen the breath slightly. You can start to wiggle fingers and toes and expand that motion into hands and feet and into arms and into legs. If you're in legs up the wall and you're wanting to come out, maybe gently bend both knees and place the bottoms of your feet against the wall. And then from here you can either push yourself away slightly and or begin to just slowly roll over to one side. When you get over onto your side, stay there. Stay there for a moment. Give yourself a big thank you for your practice, but also give yourself a big thank you for being you. A thank you for your unique embodiment in this universe. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you are here. And then at some point, slowly begin to bring yourself up to a comfortable seat. Arrive there. Bring your hands together at heart center, and I'll practice with an Om. You can join in or simply listen.